antidepressants seem to reduce the number of relapses by about 70%, which seems a relatively useful thing. I don't know if that's specific, again, but it seems to be useful. The other thing is, it's pretty clear that psychiatric drugs aren't good, but is there much better treatments? Thank you.
Right, thank you. Yes, okay, relapse prevention, I think that's very, very interesting. And there are slightly different issues for different conditions. So I did mention briefly the issue of long-term treatment in schizophrenia. As I said, there are problems with all the studies in all different conditions, because the studies of relapse prevention have all started with people who've been on long-term treatment and taken some off. And for example, with the depression trials, not only do they start with people on long-term treatment, they start with people whose long-term treatment has been successful. So they've got better on the drug treatment. The ones who haven't got better on the drug treatment never get into those relapse prevention trials. And then you take half of them off, they're going to know they've come off, because they're all going to have withdrawal symptoms. And if people feel that they've got better because of drug treatment, and now they've been taken off, I think that's going to maybe cue some people in, make some people feel really quite vulnerable in a way that maybe they wouldn't have been had they never started on drug treatment in the first place. With lithium, another relapse prevention strategy, again, I think there's a problem with all the trials, because it's been shown really quite clearly now that after you stop lithium, you're more likely to have a relapse than if you've never started it. So you can't really trust any of the trials, but they all start with people who've been on lithium for some period of time and then show, and some of them actually don't show a relapse rate reduction anyway, but some do. But you've always got this discontinuation effect, which I think is problematic. And then there's another question that I think that even if something like lithium or antipsychotics did reduce your relapse rate, do you want to say the most reliable trials of antipsychotics suggest that they reduce your relapse rate by about 16 to 17%. It's not very high, is it? So the question you've got to ask yourself is, do I want to reduce my relapse rate a bit and have to put up with all these side effects and all this dampening and sedation? So that I think is the key, really, to relapse prevention. You know, when people say it is an 80% reduce your relapse rate, that's not, that's not a reliable figure in my opinion. They may reduce your relapse rate, but it's probably by a lot less than that. And you have to work out whether that's worth the trade-off of tolerating all the adverse effects that you have. So I think and the next question about alternatives, but I think I'll take some more questions and think about that in the meantime.
Right. Two things, one very direct thing and one very straightforward thing and one pretty broad. I've taken antipsychotics for a long time, and basically I was convinced that there's research that says that people who take antipsychotics have a better prognosis for the future than people who don't. And that's the first bit I'd like to come up on. The second bit is I read the introduction to your book, and it talked quite a bit about health inequalities and how things changed in the 1970s. And I just wondered if you could say something more about how the chemical cure has been sold to us and what politicians might gain out of this.
The question about prognosis, what you're being told when you're told that you have a better prognosis than antipsychotics is that's based on the results of the trials. So there's evidence that if you take half people off their antipsychotic, they're more unlikely to relapse. If you do a naturalistic study and follow people up, people who don't take antipsychotics, well, there's two studies that show this, 2 or 3 I should say, people who don't take antipsychotics do better than people who do take antipsychotics. Now there are lots of reasons for that, but that is not just necessarily that the antipsychotics make you do badly. It's probably that people who manage to avoid taking antipsychotics probably had a less severe problem in the first place. But nevertheless, it really doesn't support the idea that antipsychotics improve your prognosis. So, as I say, the soundest evidence is these trials of relapse prevention, but they have the problems that I was talking about before. The mentioned the 1970s and all the political issues, and that's interesting. I did talk a bit about how psychiatrists desperately wanted a medical cure, a medical treatment that made them medical, and that became more acute during the 1970s because of the attacks on psychiatry by the anti-psychiatry movement, because of economic competition from non-medical therapists and social workers, psychologists, and because of the organisation of medical care in places like the United States, doesn't apply to here, but managed care that was looking for cheap, short-term interventions with people with mental health problems. So things like psychoanalysis became very unpopular, and psychiatry felt that it had to present itself as having medical treatments in order to keep its population. The political impetus, so I've talked about how the interests of the psychiatric profession and the pharmaceutical industry have both pushed this view of drug treatment. I don't think that either of those groups would be powerful enough on their own to assert it, and I think that it is the political acquiescence with this view that has really allowed it to flourish. For various reasons, I think governments have wanted, over the course of the 20th century, have wanted to medicalise mental health problems. The first reason just being that it's easy and simple. It means that an area that is otherwise actually very complex can just be pushed aside, given to the technical experts, to the doctors, to the psychiatrists, and forgotten about. It doesn't have to be debated. It doesn't have to become a democratic political problem. And you see this in the debates about the mental health legislation. It's often the politicians who are pushing the medicalisation of psychiatry even more than the doctors. For example, up until the 1959 Act, most admissions to psychiatric hospitals, most compulsory admissions, had to go in front of a magistrate. There was a legal framework, and the politicians who devised the 1930 Mental Treatment Act and the 1959 Mental Health Act both wanted to get rid of that and wanted to medicalise it, wanted to have the admission to hospital in an entirely medical framework. And in fact, before the 1959 Act was passed, people said, the politicians were saying, we don't really think there should be any legislation here, this just should be a medical issue. Of course people are going to, as soon as they get the right treatment, they're going to be quite happy and there isn't really an issue. And we're just passing this act because of public opinion. So I think does that answer your question? That was sort of political issues, I think.
Mike Loosely, I am a cellular user myself, and I work with cellular users now. I want to ask you two questions. One, a simple one. Do you continue to prescribe psychiatric medication to your clients in the everyday work as a psychiatrist? Second, perhaps a bit more difficult question. Where does acceptance of what you said, the myth of medical cure, lead us? Where does it lead psychiatrists? Where does it lead people who work with mental health service users? And more important than that, where does it lead mental health service users? It's a fascinating subject, but I'm not quite sure where we go now.
In my own practice, I do still prescribe a lot of drugs. I inherit people who've already started on drugs. I don't have to start them usually. And what I do is I try and reduce the load. We all work in teams now. I have to do that through a lot of negotiation with the other team members who are often reluctant to do that. But I usually manage to get doses down quite a bit. Where do we go with this? Is an interesting question. I think, in a way, it puts the ball back in your court in a really big way, doesn't it? Because it says, you've got to tell us when drugs are useful and when they're not useful, and we've got to listen to that. And we, the psychiatric researchers, medical researchers, pharmacologists, need to find out more about these drugs. We need to do an awful lot more research about these drugs, actually, to find out what they're doing long term, how you come off them safely, these sorts of things that actually people have hardly looked into at all. How that changes the whole nature of psychiatry. It could change it profoundly, because the idea that the drug treatments are reversing some underlying condition is one of the main planks of evidence that's used to justify the whole disease model of mental illness. If you take that plank away and say, okay, we hold up our hands, we haven't got anything that does that, it becomes a lot more fragile. And that begs the question whether we